of assistance from Libya and from oil exporting countries, which is not a loan, but was a grant. In the 1990s, you and me, lost $11 billion of our foreign currency deposits, which was financing the balance of payments of this country. And 2008 to 2013, the United States provided $7.5 billion under the Kerry-Lugar-Berman bill to Pakistan as a grant. And none of these periods were spectacular as far as growth was concerned. So foreign aid is not the determining factor as far as the economic growth story is concerned. The third hypothesis is that the West and the US have always supported the military dictators, and they have undermined the democratically elected governments, starting with Mr. Bhutto, and that is the reason why Pakistan, whenever it aligns itself, has political stability in which economy takes off. And when you look at the evidence, during our toughest times, the US and the West have abandoned us. 1965 war, a weaker Pakistan compared to a stronger India, and we were CENTO and SEATO ally, and they suspended our military aid, and we were dependent on the US. Same thing happened in 1971, 65, Ayub was a leader. 71, Yahya was a leader, and they promised us, Kissinger and Nixon, that something will happen in support of Pakistan. Nothing happened, and the country fell apart because India played that role of wrecking the country. In 1979, we had the suspension of all aid under Carter. Only when the US has its own interests, whether it is the SEATO or CENTO against the Soviet Union, or Afghanistan ousting of the Soviet Union, or the war against terror, all doors open. So it is the American interests which drive the relationship between the two countries, not the other way around. So that hypothesis is also not correct. The fourth hypothesis is that external environment has been very, unfavorable. The evidence is that between 1990 to 2008, before the global financial crisis, the share of the emerging and developing countries has gone up to 50% of the global output. 70% of the growth in the world economy has taken place because of the emerging and developing countries. China, which is an emerging country, has taken over the United States and Germany to become the largest single exporting nation in the world. And 2 billion people were poor, below the poverty line in 1990. By 2015, while the population has increased, the number of poor has declined to 840 million only. And life expectancy, child mortality, maternal mortality, all indicators show that there has been considerable progress. India and Bangladesh have increased their market share in the global market while we have declined. So the external environment is not the answer to our own woes. And finally, is the whole question of the garrison state. The military in Pakistan is so overwhelming that it has taken all its money for defense purposes, so you don't have anything left for education, health, for other social services. and for development expenditure. Ladies and gentlemen, between 1950 to 1990, Pakistan was spending 6 to 7% of GDP on defense. 30 to 40% of the budget, at one time 45% of the budget, was earmarked for defense. Today, we are down to 2.7% of GDP for defense. Between 1990 to 2000, it's been declining. And since the devolution to the provinces, the expenditure on education and health has now reached 3.7% of GDP, which is higher than defense, and nobody knows about it. Everybody says, in education and health, it is not the problem of money. It is a problem of weak governance and very poor management. You have hired teachers at extraordinary salaries, but they don't turn up and teach the students. So that, also the fact that, the military has taken over all the businesses. The entire market capitalization of the Fauji Foundation, Army Welfare Trust, Shaheen Foundation, and the Behriya Foundation Enterprises is only 4.5% of the total market cap of the Pakistan Stock Exchange. There are 7 or 8 private conglomerates in Pakistan which have much higher holdings than the entire military. So that hypothesis also is not verifiable as far as the facts are concerned. So we look to alternate explanation. I looked at the IMF empirical study, which found that the governance has a significant impact on GDP per capita across 93 countries, and governance explains 75% of the cross-country variations in income per head. This is across 93 countries, not only Pakistan. Asian Bank study for the developing Asia shows that governance indicators, government effectiveness, quality of regulation, and rule of law determine whether the country is going to do well or it is going to slide down. That is empirical study for entire world as well as for Asia. Those of you who have come across Acemoglu and Robinson's book, Why Nations Fail, would remember that they made a comparison between inclusive institutions and extractive institutions. And wherever you have inclusive institutions, the economy takes over and does well. Where you have extractive institutions, you have a problem as far as economic growth is concerned. My book, published in 1998, before I became the governor, the Pakistan, the Economy of an Elitist State, corresponds to what Acemoglu and Robinson are saying. That in Pakistan, a small proportion of 1 to 2% of the population, which I call the elitist group, which includes you and me, by the way, we cannot excuse ourselves. We don't blame just the politicians, have taken over the markets and rigged them for their own benefits. And the markets are good at efficient allocation, but they're not very good in providing equitable distribution, which is a function of the state. But the same elite has hijacked the state. So we end up in worst of both the worlds. You have inefficient market allocation, and you have inequitable income distribution. And that's what extractive institutions are. There's a study on Pakistan which shows the linkage between governance and pro-poor growth in the period 1996 to 2005. And the analysis shows that whenever we have low scores of governance indicators, we do badly as far as economy. This is on Pakistan. So you had world, Asia, and Pakistan. So my study, therefore, narrows down to look at the governance and the institutions which provide the governance in this country. And this shows that you must have a long-term agenda for economic growth, which is very encompassing, but you have to start with a process whereby some institutions are strengthened and given autonomy with accountability in order to make a difference. And how did I learn this lesson? Across the board, governance reforms are not politically feasible. For 2 years, I headed a commission which is called the National Commission for Government Reforms, 6 private sector and 6 government secretaries. And we went around Pakistan, from Deir Ismail Khan all the way to Gwadar. And we came up with a report which recommended changes in our civil services and in our institutions of civilian governance. But 3 governments have found it inconvenient to implement that report. Why? Because it does away with patronage politics. It says Pakistan prospered during the 1950 to 1990s because the civil services and the institutions were highly merit-based, performance-related. Nobody could enter except a particular process, and there was no discretionary power. There was a constitutional guarantee to the civil servants that they could not be dismissed or they could not be removed from service. That changed in 1973 when the constitutional guarantee was taken away. Lateral entry was introduced by Mr. Bhutto, in which all those who were recommended by the political party's bosses entered the civil service. So the concept of merit-based appointments just vanished. So the bright young boys and the girls who always preferred civil service stopped joining the civil service or competing for the exams, because they think that anybody who sells his soul and becomes a loyalist to one of the 2 other political parties, that individual is going to rise. Competence, integrity, professionalism are no longer the driving force. I give you just one example. Pakistan International Airline, from its inception till 1990, had only 6 managing directors. From 1990 to 2015, we had more than 20 managing directors. That is how the institutions are destroyed. And those who work in the public sector institutions, their lives are made miserable because they are being asked to do things which are against their own conscience, which are against the rules, and which are against the norms of good practices. It hasn't happened in India that the Congress party loses election and BJP comes to power, or the vice versa, and all the secretaries of the government and all the managing directors and the CEOs of public sector corporations are changed. And the new political party brings in their own cronies. This has happened in Pakistan since 1990s. And to me, if you analyze every single crisis which Pakistan is facing today, law and order, if you divide the appointment of the constables and sub-inspectors on a quota distributed between the two political parties who rule this province, what do you get in return? You get officers who are not looking after the law and order and your and my security. They are patronizing all the brothels, all the gambling places, all the mafias, all the criminals, because they are getting money and distributing among those are the patrons. How do you expect Karachi to be a vibrant, peaceful city? And you saw the difference between 2013 and after 2013 in this city. Look at education.